It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. I try to be a superhero. Now, I'm just trying to keep my sanity. Part 1. It started out with the night terrors. I bolt up in bed having had the most vivid images ravage my sleeping brain. Often they were blurs of drunken debauchery, at a club or a bar or some such place. Sometimes I'd witness someone arguing with another person, their lover, their parent, their child. Sometimes I'd witness something far more violent. Worse was that, after I'd woken up, I could still see and hear the images in my head. For a while I thought I was still dreaming, trapped in some lucid nightmare I couldn't escape. After about a week of experimenting in the daytime, I realized they weren't dreams at all. I could read other people's thoughts. When it was lights out, I realized I could control my telepathic influx. I could decide whose thoughts I heard, or if I heard anyone's thoughts for that matter. It really was as easy as it sounds, like tensing and untensing a muscle. I'd think of a person or look at someone and immediately have access to their conscious mind. It's like when you think of a movie you've seen 1,000 times, and how, just by thinking of it, you can visualize all the actors' faces and recall the dialogue to its exact detail. If I concentrated hard enough, I could even find out a person's past experiences, not to mention their darkest secrets. If I wanted to, I could hear everyone's thoughts around me. All I needed to do was open up my mind, like opening this invisible cupboard drawer inside my brain. The thoughts of everyone around me would then come flooding into my head, like raindrops into a cupped pair of hands. I didn't do that much, though. It wasn't that the thoughts that came to me were unpleasant, per se, but the amount would build with every passing second, overwhelming me to near breaking point. And this was especially the case since I lived in a fairly large urban city. Instead, I usually focused on one person at a time, and never more than 3. I know what you're thinking. How do I know I wasn't going mad? Well, I was certainly worried about that too. Schizophrenia and manic depression do run in my family, and in my immediate family to be exact, so in order to be sure, I ran a couple of tests. First, I would focus on a person and try to divine what they would say before they said it. Well, this got interesting when riding the bus, when no one would be talking for long stretches of time. Nonetheless, their next line of dialogue would come to me. I'd write it down on my pad of paper, and within a few minutes, they would utter those exact words out loud, on their phone or to a person sitting next to them. I started doing this with my friends and family, reading their thoughts when I was far out of range. Once, while I was sick at home from school, I was able to hear the exact conversation taking place between 2 of my friends in the cafeteria. I remember they were mostly whispering and that the cafe was especially loud that day. When I met with them the next morning, I recited their conversation back to them word for word. Delighted, I watched the colour drain from their faces. "How did you know that?" one asked, marvelling at my uncanny insight. "Were you spying on us?" I never told them how I knew. Why should I? This was my gift after all, my little secret. With little trouble, I was able to read the minds of both my father and auntie as well. I must confess their lives were rather boring, their only secrets being where they stashed their booze and when they found time to sneak the occasional joint during a workday. The only person I could never reach was my older sister, Emma. Emma was always the cool-headed type and had been that golden child in our family, especially when it came to school. Teachers and older relatives had always said I was precocious, but I was perfectly mediocre next to Emma. At this time, she was a freshman at the University of Toronto, studying economics with a minor in international relations. I just figured I couldn't reach her mind because she moved so far away from us. Eventually, I decided that I needed to use my ability to its fullest potential. Well, as you've likely guessed from the title of this post, I am a big comic books nerd, especially of the superhero variety. I was also a teenager, much like Peter Parker when he got that radioactive spider bite, and had very big, if not somewhat immature, ambitions. I mean, what adolescent doesn't want to fight crime with their newfound superpowers, or use them to make the world a better place. I won't lie though, I didn't immediately go out after dark in search of the Joker's henchmen or meet up with S.H.I.E.L.D. to vanquish Thanos. I first used my ability for admittedly selfish purposes. For the first few months, I didn't bother studying for tests, instead reading the thoughts of the teacher or the smartest kid in the class for the answers. I also used a few people's credit card information to buy myself some inexpensive items, just some action figures, comics, and candy. This ended up saving me some extra bucks for the occasional six-pack, when I found a cashier willing to look the other way. This is also how I learned the limitations of my power. One of my self-indulgent experiments was to use my telepathy to read the mind of the cute boy whom I'd had a crush on. After reading his mind and discovering he was barely cognizant of my existence, I tried to project thoughts of myself to him. Admittedly, it felt odd, trying to think of thoughts for another person and plant them in their brain, especially flattering notions of myself. Looking back, I must admit I shouldn't have been surprised by his indifference. There were so many pretty girls in our cohort, and I've always been a bit of a tomboy. After a few weeks of him still paying me no mind, I tried to communicate with him telepathically, seeing what his reaction would be if he knew my feelings for him. I did this during study hall, when everyone was busy poring over their textbooks. I managed to seat myself just to his right, so I had full view of that side of his face. Well, much to my dismay, he never once looked at me, no matter how persistent or vigorous my telepathic messages. He never took his eyes off his textbook or even seemed perturbed. I knew that my efforts to project my thoughts telepathically had not found purchase. I thusly learned that while I could read other people's thoughts, I could not make them read mine. And that was that. But this did lead me to my second discovery. Crestfallen over my failed attempt at psychic seduction, I lazed on the couch at home and channel surfed until finding an old Stephen King movie. It was the Brian De Palma classic Carrie, and I stumbled upon the scene in which Carrie White was wreaking bloody havoc at her school prom. I hadn't considered telekinesis, the possibility that I could move objects with my mind. Though as I thought it over, I did remember seeing things suddenly fly off my dresser and around my room during those lucid night terrors. I could even recall my father complaining about the ruckus I'd made during those nights, even though I swore I'd been asleep and had never left my bed. I decided to run another little experiment to find out if I was in fact telekinetic. I focused my attention to the remote, which was placed just out of reach on the leather couch arm. Within seconds I saw it begin to seesaw, then lurch closer to my out-held hand. Focusing harder, I brought it flying into my palm just as my thoughts had commanded. Oh, my stomach flipped. I held my breath for a moment, marveling at the otherwise ordinary TV controller before letting out a shuddering laugh. I was right. I was telekinetic. I couldn't help but think of all the possibilities this would afford me. I was like Jean Grey in the X-Men or something. For the rest of the day, I practiced moving small objects around my bedroom, simultaneously fantasizing about all the possibilities this new ability would afford me. What was odd was that, although I could control everything in the daytime, I was still plagued by unsolicited visions during the night. Not all the time, but they came often enough for me to worry. Often enough for me to be upset by them. At the time, I dismissed this as my powerful subconscious utilizing my psychic abilities while I slept. It was all I could do with the experiences being so awful, so traumatic. One of these midnight episodes was how I finally made up my mind to stop procrastinating and use my powers to do good. It would lead to my first and only heroic crusade. It came to me in the night, the most horrific scenario any woman could ever imagine. I saw a girl not much older than I, small, petite, and pretty, being dragged into the back of a stranger's van. Her body felt limp and heavy, her mind screaming at her useless arms and legs. I read her thoughts and found out her name was Selena and that she was 17. I searched her recent memories, discovering she and a couple of friends had snuck into a local bar with some phony IDs. The bar was a real dive, I remember. While at the stick, she'd been approached by a much older man who offered to buy her and her friends another round. The man was accompanied by a woman, whom he claimed to be his wife. Well, this initially set Selina at ease. Selina's mind was foggy on how many drinks she'd consumed, what had happened to her teenage companions, and how she'd appeared in the back alleyway. But it was clear who was carrying her toward the ominous open van. I scanned the surrounding thoughts and found the man, a marginally employed, marginally educated narcissist named Rufus Butler. He was 28, open-haired, well-groomed and boyishly handsome, and this was not his first abduction. I searched his female companion, a 35-year-old woman named Leanne Whalen, and she was not his wife. She had limp yellow hair, an equine face, and dark circles under her eyes. I discovered that she was an insecure sadist who went along with these sick midnight escapades to be seen as an asset to her sociopathic, insatiable spouse, knowing he would, inevitably, grow bored with her. I ignored her and went back to Butler. He was driving southwest on Golf Links Road, Selina having already been flung into the back. I could divine that he was headed for his home. I scoured his thoughts and found the image of what he intended to do. It revolted me, made me shudder and want to vomit. He was planning on gagging Selina, then tying her down, wrists bound, legs tethered apart, to a bed frame in his soundproof basement. There he would have his way with her for weeks on end. He would force her to take more mind-altering drugs, reducing her to his own personal human sex doll. I couldn't just watch it happen. I couldn't allow such a man to live. First, I tried to use my telekinesis to stop the van. When that didn't work, I tried stopping Butler's heart. But I could see that he was fine and still making his way home to carry out his gruesome fantasy. I needed to be closer. I needed to physically be there. Unlike the other times I'd seen horrible things in the night, I made up my mind to do something. Ignoring the sudden flow of incoming thoughts from other parts of the city, I laser-focused on where Butler was going. His house was a quaint split-level home he'd been gifted from his wealthy mother near River Terrace Park, a 7-minute drive from my home. I got out of bed, dressed, nicked my father's car keys, and began gunning it to that exact address. But after driving for hardly a block, I had to pull over. My head was throbbing, going berserk with teeming thoughts and the images from an all-night party somewhere within the vicinity of my neighborhood. It was like 1,000 buzzing insects trapped inside my skull. I didn't know how at the time, but I was eventually able to get a grip on myself and tune out the unwanted mental traffic. I turned the engine back over and flew through the city streets, blowing each red light I came across. I arrived at the split-level house a few minutes after Butler had pulled into the garage. The neighborhood was perfectly suburban, a row of comfortably spaced brick houses, each with a driveway, ample lawn, attached garage, and a wooden or wired fence leading into a backyard. Each house was some scheme of maroon, tan or amber brick with mahogany or white wooden trim. I pulled up onto the curb and killed the engine. I knew from reading his thoughts which one was Butler's home, and although the shutter door was closed, I knew the 3 of them were in there. Butler and Leanne had already alighted from the van. They were strolling their way to the rear, chatting as though they'd just arrived from the supermarket and were in the process of unloading groceries. Butler's hip brushed up against something, and I saw that he had a gurney set up to carry the girl into their house and down to their basement. The meticulousness and nonchalance. I felt bile rise to the back of my throat. I stood on the blackly fresh drive, my chest heaving, adrenaline roaring through my veins. No turning back now. Opting for a dramatic entrance, I focused my mind on the shutter door, commanding it to open. Well, thus far, I'd only used my telekinesis to remove small objects, remotes, lamps, and pens, so this proved quite arduous. After a few seconds, aware that Leanne and Butler had almost strapped Selina to the gurney, I gave up trying to manipulate the machinery and began to violently pull at the massive door. The metal was shrieking as I did. With an iron whine and a thunderous woody crack, I tore the garage open like a can of sardines. The shutter was crushed into the shape of a walnut and rolled onto the grass. I advanced toward the open structure. Inside, the three of them were frozen in a terror-stricken tableau, Butler and Leanne staring wall-eyed at me. The girl Selena was unconscious. She lay prostrate inside the van beside the stretcher. What the hell? I heard Butler mutter. He began taking small, reticent steps onto his drive. As he approached, I observed the open van behind him. The rear doors opened to the sides like an ambulance instead of vertically like other models. I saw the door closest to his back, its carbon steel outer edge positioned parallel with his spine. But I didn't hesitate. Focusing my mind and rage, I sent the little creep flying backward, pinning him hard against the dull blade. His spine hit flush, his head thrown back and cracking against the makeshift guillotine. There was a splat and snap of bone. He fell limp to the concrete like a rag doll. I could no longer read his thoughts. "Oh my God!" shrieked the woman named Leanne. Her hands shook beside her face as she knelt down to console her fallen lover. Her compassion for that sick pervert turned my stomach. I focused my mind around her throat and began to hear her choking. Caught up in the violent ecstasy of the moment, I sent her airborne up into the garage ceiling. There was a clatter of breaking glass, a sputter of light, and a hail of plaster and splintered wood. For a moment, her long dangling legs were the only part of her visible. After a second or two, she came back to earth, hitting the ground hard. There was a long, drawn-out silence, but then I heard a shrieking inhale, her breath having been driven from her body. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes, her mouth wide with horror, her legs contorted under her in an unnatural position. Her face was scuffed up a bit, but miraculously there were no lacerations. A single trickle of blood slithered down her temple to her chin. She looked completely helpless, completely in my power. "Listen to me, you heinous bitch," I growled, biting each syllable as I spoke. She was sobbing but nodding her head, indicating she was listening. She clearly understood that what had just happened to her and Rufus was my doing. "You go to the police and you tell them everything. Everything. Even the girls before this one. You go there and you tell them to come here and search the house. Either that, or I kill you. Do you understand me?" She nodded feverishly. Since she was still sitting there and I wasn't about to help her up, I barked for her to get moving. She scrambled to her feet and I could read in her mind how painful it was, her knee lightly dislocated, if not fractured. I watched her limp away, unable to block my pity and remorse with rage, which was all now but spent. The man Butler had still not moved, lying on the pavement in a quivering heap. I then turned my attention to the girl Selena. Climbing inside the van, I could smell something wet and fetid. I gagged, putting my hand to my mouth, realizing that she had fouled herself. My heart lurched, wondering if the drugs had caused her to overdose. Terrified that I'd failed, I stuck 2 fingers to the side of her neck. It took a while, but I found a pulse. It was weak and crawlingly slow, but there all the same. In the heat of the moment, I tried rousing her, shaking her by the shoulders and lightly slapping her on the cheek. Well, I know now I should just have called an ambulance. Then, like a vampire in those old horror movies, her eyes shot open. I squealed, pulling back and falling on my butt along the cold metal floor. Her eyes were wide but lifeless. Like a marionette manipulated by strings, she stretched vertical before me. On her feet now, she walked past me out of the garage and onto the street. I watched her, not understanding what was going on. I was still unable to read her thoughts, no matter how hard I focused on her. "Very impressive, Estelle," said a voice. Well, I started and gave out a little squeak. This voice wasn't like the others that invaded my thoughts at night. This one was brighter, more prominent, and unlike the others, I couldn't decipher where it had come from, not even a vague locale. "Who said that?" I demanded, looking around, trying to sound as brave as I knew I wasn't. I didn't hear an answer, but instead felt a compulsion to leave the garage in the direction of my father's car. There, I saw another vehicle. A silver, nondescript station wagon, parked behind me. The driver's side door opened, and I saw her face. "Emma!" I bleated, recognizing my older sister. "Estelle," she said in a staid voice. She looked composed and immaculate, but wore a visage of annoyance verging on disappointment. "We can't stay here. Follow my car." "But what about—" "Don't worry about them," she interrupted. "I've handled it. Just follow me." She'd handled it? What did that mean? It was then that I realized that despite all the commotion, none of the houses on the block looked disturbed. No windows lit, no blinds undrawn, not even a dog barking. Emma climbed back into the driver's seat, and I heard the engine begin to cook. Not seeing any reason not to, I clambered into my dad's car and drove behind her. The two of us cruised through the sleeping city. I had trouble keeping my eyes on the road then. Well, I hadn't noticed before, but I'd begun to feel fatigued. At the time, I shrugged this off, attributing it to the late hour. Still, it was a bit scary, nodding off at the wheel, finding myself drifting between lanes onto the hard shoulder. To keep my mind occupied, I tried reading Emma's thoughts, figuring that she was now in reach. I couldn't. I couldn't get anything from her, not a single inkling as to her mental state. I left it alone and continued to drive. She ended up leading me back to our father's house. She took me the long way home, which was probably because she'd meant to take me somewhere else, but had thought better of it. When we got out, she told me to go back to bed and that we'd discuss this early the next morning. "Call into school sick," she told me. "I have something very important to discuss with you." When I asked why, she shook her head and stated, "Tomorrow." Well, I was too exhausted to argue. Not wanting to be deprived of any more sleep, I nodded in agreement. She got back in her car and drove to God knows where. Part 2. By the next morning, I didn't have to pretend to call into school sick. I felt like the rug on the floor of my father's car, the one below the pedal and the brakes. Regardless, Emma came and picked me up and would not hear any excuse. I remember the day was radiant, warm, sunny, the sky a flawless azure. As we drove down Balmoral, I could see young children and their parents flying kites in the nearby park or eating ice cream. I felt better, but still had trouble keeping my eyes open. We stopped at Hillcrest Park, at the heights overlooking the city, all the way down to the harbour. Without a word, Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and got out. I knew to do the same. We stood before the small stone wall that plateaued at our hips, peering down at all the chimneys and rooftops. 10 feet to our left was one of those carronades mounted next to a flagpole. I'd always enjoyed this view, but I knew my big sister hadn't brought me here to take in the scenery. "You must be tired, right?" she asked, a coy smile curling on the side of her face. I nodded, letting out a not quite exaggerated groan. "I thought as much. Using your telekinesis like you did last night would be draining." Squinting, I searched her face. "Don't worry," she said, having read my thoughts. "With practice you won't be as fatigued afterward, and yes, I know enough about what you're going through. You're lucky that your distressed thoughts last night woke me. It was quite the mess you left me to clean up." "You can read my thoughts?" I said, not as a question. "Yes, I've been in town for some time. Even from Toronto I could sense your powers blossoming. I came as soon as I could to supervise. Well, after last night, I gathered that I'd waited long enough. But what about your studies at university?" Emma then turned to face me. "What about it?" she said, followed by a hollow, effortless laugh. "It's a joke. I just read my professors' minds for the answers, or for the type of content and opinions they want in a paper. I don't even bother showing up to the lectures, especially since they don't take attendance." Digesting all this, I nodded my head. "So, You can read people's thoughts and communicate with them. Without speaking. I can do more than that, little sister. I'm a full telepath. I can read people's thoughts, make them read mine, and control their behavior and thinking. I balked. What did you say? You heard me. She turned her cold mauve eyes my way. My sister had always been gorgeous. Oval face, full lips, tumbling flaxen hair, alabaster skin with a rosy hue. But now, staring at me, she looked formidable, intimidating, a statue sovereign carved from granite. But why would you do that? Control people's minds? Without answering, she turned to the view. You're the same age I was when I discovered my gift, she said, keeping up that mysterious, airy tone. Same age as our mother, actually. Our mother? I exclaimed, cocking my head back. Our mother was crazy. Don't you dare say that, she snapped, glowering with those smouldering eyes of hers. Like our late mother, Estelle had been burdened with suicidal tendencies, though her attempts were fueled more by a depressed resignation than a maddened delirium. As is common in gifted children, her premature wisdom of the world filled her with a sense of futility. No, she was no such thing. She was like you, a half-telepath, able to read people's thoughts but unable to communicate with others. Unlike me, she'd not developed a door. A door? Yes, a kind of shield inside your head that allows you to block out people's thoughts. It also allows you to focus on one individual, rather than having every single conscious mind deluge your thoughts. Silently, I let this sink in. The invisible cupboard door. Then my sister spoke up. Like I said before, Estelle, don't do anything like what you did last night again. It's too messy and risks too much exposure. We can't have people knowing about us. Not yet. Spinning on her, I spat out my reply. Too much exposure? They were going to rape that girl, torture her for days on end. I couldn't let that happen. Look, you're an adult now. Even though you're not quite 16, it's time to put away childish things. Well, how's acting like a being a good Samaritan childish? I tried to stop myself, but it was too late. Emma would have read my thoughts anyway. Smirking, she chuckled to herself, without mirth. Still reading those comic books, are we? Sulking, I let my shoulders slump. I mumbled my reply. They're called graphic novels. Another cheerless chuckle. Estelle never had time for graphic novels, or manga, or even television. Her only vices being Sudoku and red wine. I wonder, Estelle, how many crimes have you seen take place in your nighttime divinations? How many armed robberies, drug deals, home invasions, even homicides have you witnessed? But a ritualistic sexual assault is the one you chose to stop, to avenge? Again I squinted, scrutinizing my sister's statuesque profile. I never thought about it, I guess. I didn't know those other people, but last night was different. Personal? What the hell does that mean? I barked. Not quite startled, Emma stared, bewildered at me, then turned her head as though to let it alone. I have plans for you, Estelle. For us. This is the beginning of a great, tumultuous future for our family. What's that? At my university, I've scanned the campus and found the brightest minds, the most brilliant and creative people of our generation. And they know others on other campuses. They're going to make huge strides in the future. New technologies, business ventures, software innovation. They'll be billionaires before they turn 30. And they are going to work under me. All of their hard work and success will be to my benefit. And it won't just be one company. It will be several, each one acting in concert toward my ends. Not for nothing, sis, but you're starting to sound like Lex Luthor there. Shh, look, enough of that. You're too young to understand yet, but money and power are the only driving engines on Earth. Nothing is more powerful than money, and nothing is more valuable than power. With his wealth and influence, we can leverage world governments, including that of the United States, to bend to our will. We would be able to forge the destiny of this entire planet and be free from the dangers that oft befall the working class. Unemployment, disease, poverty. We would be an empire. No one could touch us. I stared at her for a long while, my mind rejecting what I was hearing. I'm not sure why, but at that moment the only question I could think to ask my sister was, "Why do you need me?" Well, an undertaking this size could not be maintained by one person alone, even with my telepathic abilities. I would need you to work as my partner, overseeing other businesses on other sides of the globe. You could stay in the Americas if you like. The two of us should be strong enough, at least until I can find a third telepath or telekinetic. At that moment, a crystallized vision of my sister's design came to me. I don't know if it's a product of my precocious intuition or of a new ability I'd yet to fully utilize, but I saw the future as molded by her ambition, and it sickened me. Millions upon millions of ordinary people, hunched over under my sister's boot, completely deprived of free will or thought. They wore rags, walked barefoot, and had dirt caked to their faces. They sold their children into brutal labor. They were completely deprived of dignity and, worse, didn't know the difference. I couldn't be party to this dystopian vision. I shuddered, backpedaling from my sister. She stared at me, puzzled. "Emma, if you enslave the people working directly under you, then what would stop you from doing the same to others? What would stop you from enslaving the entire planet?" "Nothing," she stated matter-of-factly. "So you don't want to make the world a better place. You want to enslave everyone and force them to live like cattle." "Despair is a reality, sweet Estelle. I'm just ensuring that you and I will always remain abreast of it." Perhaps out of love to my sister, I felt compelled to reason with her, not ready to part ways for good. "But if you do this, people will inevitably become resentful. Their lives will mean nothing, so they'll revolt and try to take us over. Hundreds of thousands will die, maybe millions." There again was that humorless smile twisting my sister's face. "You are smart, I'm glad. Don't worry about that. They will have no will or desire to question us. I'm able to put in thought blocks, a telepathic plant that disallows certain ideas, desires, and ambitions from taking root. Our future will be secure and indefinite." "You're gonna block their very ability to have certain thoughts, certain curiosities." The smile was gone now. She just stared at me, her expression that of morose discontent. No, I cried. "I won't be part of something like that. Something so immoral, so evil. You can forget it." And suddenly, I was seized with pain, horrible mental anguish from the onslaught of something loud and glaringly bright. I didn't recognize it at first. There was so much, and it all came at once. I then realized what it was. The thoughts of all the conscious beings within a 5-kilometer radius. Their thoughts, what they saw, what they heard, what they pondered, tore into my brain like shards falling from a shattered mirror. I could feel the patients inside the emergency hospital, located 3 kilometers away. I not only heard their screams and saw their faces, but felt their pain and confusion, their nausea, their despair. It was so much worse, so much louder than in the nighttime. My skull was a hornet's nest of blistering imagery, and the circumference of my telepathic reach, along with the number of teeming thoughts pouring into me, was expanding, spreading and spreading, and spreading. "Do you feel that?" came the prominent voice I knew to be my sister's. It hovered over the other voices like a cindering halo. "That's what our mother had to endure every day for 25 years. This is the curse of telepaths who cannot form a mental door to block out the unwanted traffic." Quivering, tearing up, I stuttered out, But I thought... No, Estelle, you are not blessed with an inner door like I am. That's why other thoughts come unsolicited to you in the night. During the day, I provide you with a door. My telepathic power allows me to provide you with that ability. I funnel your thoughts. Without me lending you this door, your mind is exposed. Please, make it stop. And in an instant, the excruciating horror ceased. I stood there rocking on my heels, panting and sweating. My temples throbbed from the heat of an onset headache. I don't understand. You give me the door during the day. That's right, she said verbally. While conscious, I can provide you with the mental shield that I have, which allows me to be a functional, sane telepath. This is one of my abilities as a full telepath. The door that I give you is just that, a door. It closes off any telepathic influx, but can be opened and closed again by you. Every time you read an individual's mind, you are opening that door a crack, making yourself vulnerable to other traffic, making yourself vulnerable for other telepaths to read your thoughts. That's why I could never read her thoughts, her door. Then why do you take this door away from me while I sleep? So you can keep me hostage? Why would you subject me to such torture? Taken aback, Emma shook her head twice. My dear sister, you're only given that door because I will it. As soon as I'm unconscious or asleep, it goes away. Well, my body waxed numb as I processed the implications of what she'd just said. Imagine the sleepless nights and the torment if you lived in a city like New York or Chicago or Toronto. The tens of millions of voices echoing in your skull day in, day out. The thousands, if not millions of voices blaring non-stop in the night. Be grateful you live in Thunder Bay, a city of only 100,000, the only major municipality for 100 kilometers. I shuddered, realizing that to preserve my sanity in a way my mother hadn't, I needed my sister alive, indefinitely, alive and cooperative. But I wasn't ready to give in just yet. I'm your hostage then. You plan to threaten to leave me exposed to all these thoughts unless I give in. There was that bloodless smirk again. Oh, I prefer not to think of it that way, Estelle. Still nauseous from the previous onslaught, Emma's patronizing tone, the one she'd been using on me since we were in primary school, really dug under my skin. I then made a decision. It was rash and compulsive, but I chose it regardless. Emma began to make clucking sounds as though she were sobbing with a dry throat. I knew better. My telekinetic grip was wrapped around her throat like an invisible snare, and I wasn't about to let go. If you don't give me that door, I said, staring into her bulging bloodshot eyes, then I'll just kill you. I'll break your neck like a chicken's. As expected, I felt the white-hot barrage of alien thought flooding my head. I kept my nerve, holding my sister there, throttling her, watching her face turn blue while her nails clawed track marks into her neck. The volume of sensory stimuli grew denser, bludgeoning. My head felt like a swelling watermelon. Emma's feet were now hovering just off the pavement. Estelle, my sister telegraphed, the message smothered by the howling cacophony inside my head. If you kill me, this will be your life. You'll go mad like our mother. Maybe I'll just move to a small city, away from everyone. I forced the words out through gritted teeth, spittle airborne with each consonant. And then I felt Emma doing something inside my head, something that wasn't a telepathic message or a door or even a thought block. I could feel her psychic fingers probing deep inside my brain, peeling back layers of something I hadn't known was there. somewhere I hadn't realized existed before. And then something came loose, something I'd long ago buried from my conscious mind. I saw our mother just before her suicide. She was in my bed, staring down at me. She looked tired, her face sallow and bloated, as it often was from her heavy drinking. She'd snuck into my room late at night and slid in beside me, the acetone of vodka and nail polish remover announcing her before I'd opened my eyes. Her eyes looked hungry, lidded and lecherous, her sandy hair matted on one side. There came another smell, a musk both familiar and repulsive. I remembered that I first thought she wanted to cuddle me, to tuck me in, or to sing me a lullaby. Instead, she swathed me with her ploughing, greedy hands. She began playing roughly with my hair. Her fingers caressed my forehead, then traversed my eyelids down to my trembling lips. Then I felt her touch slip down my neck to my chest. I whimpered, her cooing into my ear having the opposite effect of its intended one. I was then aware of her touch on my thigh, then higher, and then... "Stop, stop," I cried. "Oh, let me go," came Emma's ultimatum. Hesitating, allowing my brain to linger on the vile memory of that encounter a little longer, I held Emma for a few more fleeting seconds, and then released. I could hear Emma gasp and then cough hoarsely. I was on my knees, sobbing, trying to wash that traumatic experience from my brain. I could not. It stayed, looming in my mind's eye, razzing me like an eyelash out of place. And then it slowly disappeared. I knew it was still there, I could feel it, but mercifully it had dissipated enough so that I could think clearly. Begrudgingly, I recognized this was Emma's doing. "You are powerful," came Emma's message. Even her thoughts sounded strange from my prior stranglehold on her. "Your telekinesis will be very valuable to me and my future business associates." My sobs ebbing, I remained kneeling on the concrete, as if genuflecting before my sister. "I want you to be my partner in my empire, Estelle. I need someone I can trust. I don't want to put in a thought block to prevent you from opposing me, but I will if I must. Our destiny is clear. We must obtain as much wealth and influence as possible to assure the safety and prosperity of our family and descendants. The world is increasingly dangerous and unstable. You know this is the right thing to do." Too harried to argue, to even speak, I just swallowed, acquiescing to my sister's will. I watched the ants crawling in and out of the grassy crack by my leg, contemplating their existence. My sister dictated her plans for me for the next month. I didn't hear her, knowing that my mind would eventually retain the info. I just waited until she was satisfied, until I knew she knew that I had submitted to her. My sister drove me back to our father's house, where she dropped me off. She told me in a curt voice to keep in touch, that she would have further instructions to give me soon. I just nodded, wordlessly, not truly hearing her. Alone inside the house, I slunk up the stairs to my bedroom, where I retrieved my illicit six-pack of lager from inside my closet. I popped the first can open and took a long swig. Not satisfied, I recalled where my father had stashed his fifth of 12-year-old scotch, below the sink behind the piping. Finding it, I poured 3 fingers into a glass on the kitchen counter and tossed it back. The smoky, pungent flavor brought tears to my eyes. I gagged, not used to the taste or the burn that followed. I then allowed my mind to wander, to go blank. And that's when I saw it a second time. The future. Our future is molded by my sister's ambition. I saw it. Humanity under her foot. Millions not knowing they were livestock being herded into a pen. All free thought, except hers, erased from existence. I then felt the white-hot barrage of the massive consciousness hovering around me. I didn't fight. Didn't bother trying to close the door inside my head, the one Emma was lending me. Instead, I poured another 3 fingers of whiskey and tossed it back, enjoying the sensation more the second time. I swallowed a 3rd dram and chased it with a swig of warm beer. I repeated this inebriating ritual until I was dizzy and sick, until the alien thoughts buzzing inside my head were muddled to an almost tolerable murmur. And then I proceeded to drink more, until I drunk myself unconscious. I'm writing about this experience 2 years later. I'm afraid that my sister didn't wait to finish her degree to begin the process of building her empire. Not even the current global pandemic has been successful in slowing down her progress. I must admit, I myself have done questionable things, things that I regret each day, things that have driven me to the bottle. But I'm sure you'll sympathize. She hears all my thoughts and is the only one who can give me the door to funnel out the maddening traffic that pulsates around me. My sister explained that, without the door, my telepathic reach would expand slowly but gradually, spanning perhaps the entire continent if not contained. This has not been a problem yet since I've stayed in Thunder Bay. I'm still disturbed during the night, but not to the extent that I would be elsewhere. In so many ways, I'm trapped in this city. And for a while I wondered about that door. Why was it that my sister could form her own, but neither my mother nor I could? For a long time I hoped, prayed that I'd be able to teach myself to form my own. But after spending countless nights awake trying, I know that I cannot. Without my sister and the mental shield she loans me, the volume of telepathic intake will be unbearable and always expanding. Nevertheless, I did hold out hope for a few months. My sister had alluded to other telepaths, used terms like half and full telepath when speaking to me, leading me to believe there was someone else like us, someone more benign who might help me. Emma has told me that she's the only living telepath powerful enough to control people to the extent that she does, that no one could possibly threaten her hegemony. For so long I hoped that she was lying, and now I'm afraid she was telling the truth. I've searched the thoughts of my city and the municipalities close by, and thus far, she's been proven right. I've tried searching farther out, but I can't yet, and I'm afraid to leave this city. So I'm typing this out now, while my sister and my city sleep, hoping that it reaches someone far away who's like Emma, someone who is as powerful but more benevolent, someone who'd be willing to help me learn how to form my own door and be independent, and to break free of my sister's tyrannical hold. If this post doesn't reach a telepath who can assist me in challenging my sister, I hope then, at the very least, that those of you unburdened by psychic abilities will heed this warning. Your world, the world as you know it, is finite. The age of conscience and free thought is rapidly coming to an end. One of the things that really brings me joy is that, when I get to the end of the story, and I can think to myself, damn, I've never read anything quite like that before, it really is something, and that was definitely the case with that one. Didn't see any of that coming, to be honest with you, and, all kind of made sense in the end, but wow, what a story. Very original concept, something I have not encountered anywhere before. Well, what did you think? Did you like that one? Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video. And as ever, I'll do my best to join the conversation. Another fantastic one from Dr. Creepen's Vault, the subreddit I set up so you could share your stories with me and I could read them all to you. Have you got a story you would like me to read? Something you've written? Well, can't promise I read all of the stories in the vault, but I do my very best. Links in the video description below. Well, that's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed the stories. Back again. You know what? I've got something lined up for Sunday, so please come back on Sunday and join me in. Until then, very, very sweet dreams and bye-bye.